direction during COVID-19. With me, Jason Connolly from JMC Legal Recruitment. To anyone that hasn't come across us before, we're a national legal recruitment agency. We recruit all over the UK. I've also recruited internationally. I mainly deal with partner moves, team moves across the city and the West End of London. Lots of experience, and I've helped several thousand candidates move careers over my career. So really well placed to answer your questions, and thanks so much to the Law Society for bringing me here today to help as many of you as I possibly can. No question is too small, so do feel free to put your questions in. If we go to the next slide, thank you. So some of the housekeeping, we encourage you to all participate in today's session. You can ask questions in the chat box at the top left of the screen. If you do have any technical issues, please post these in the chat box and one of the team will respond to you via a private message, or you can also email queries to events@thelawsociety.org.uk. Great. So I'll make a start now. Please feel free to put your questions down, and we will start going through those. It's obviously a tricky time at the moment during COVID. But all things considered, we haven't actually seen a slowdown in roles. We're very, very busy, and especially in the regions, we've seen roles picking up to the level they were at pre-COVID. So there is a good opportunity at the moment for candidates out there. Where we have seen a reduction in roles has been for the more junior level positions. So whether it being legal support, but also newly qualified at 1 and 2 years. But the market from 2 years up is very, very busy, and we've actually had one of our busiest ever months. I think the legal market, it's been very quick to adapt. I think they've kind of there's been 5 years of evolution in 5 months. And it's really busy. So I'll start with one of the questions that have been sent in, and I think it's a relevant question to perhaps a lot of people here today. The first question is, what factors should I consider when making a career change during the pandemic? I think one of the first things you want to think about when making a move is maybe the practice area that you work in. Is the practice area that you work in buoyant? Is it busy? And I think you want to look at your own job and first of all, think about what is it I'm actually doing. So we'll talk firstly about fee earners. So you want to look at your level of billings. You always want to kind of step back. And what I always tell people to do is, before even considering a career change, step back and work out a 5 to 10 year career plan. What is it that you ultimately, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And kind of back plan from there. So if your ultimate goal, say in 10 years' time, is to be a partner of a department, then what you need to think about is, does your next career move put you on that path and that trajectory to where you want to be? So you don't want to just look at the short term. And I think a lot of the time, especially when people are maybe at a more junior level, there's a lot of focus about the next salary, how this next role necessarily, is that going to remunerate you better? But a lot of the time you want to be thinking much more longer term, much more bigger picture, because legal can be a really unforgiving sector to be in, especially if you're making too many moves. You don't want to be moving too often. But interestingly, according to LinkedIn and some stats that we actually ran as an organisation, the average tenure in legal currently is only 2 years in a role, which is really surprising, and I think it shocked a lot of people when we put those statistics out. But that's according to LinkedIn in the UK. But I think when thinking about your career, think about where it is you want to be. If you want to be a partner in 10 years' time, say of a city firm, does that next role actually put you on that trajectory? So, for instance, you might be qualifying in a firm that's in the regions, and supposing that you want to move to a city firm, it might be a bit too much of a jump to necessarily go straight in for that firm now, due to maybe the type or the quality of work. But what you want to do is put yourself in a position where those firms actually recruit from. So if a city firm might recruit from a top West End firm, you need to put yourself in that setting. I think when also considering making a career change, I think you want to speak to a recruiter, one who really knows what they're on about, someone who's going to give you actual honest career advice. And you want to think about, as I said, does this align long term? I will move on to some of the other questions. I think we'll be talking a lot about the pandemic and a lot about making a career change throughout this. So I think this will also tie in quite nicely to this question. The second question that I've been submitted is, for the last 2 years, I've been using my time to prove my skill set to enable me to secure a job as a litigation professional, litigation professional support or knowledge lawyer. As a starting point, I'm thinking about setting up some informational interviews and informal interviews to help me understand the current market and industry requirement. Could you please suggest how to identify people that are willing to speak to me? And is there an informational interview going to be welcome during COVID-19? I think the market at the moment is still ongoing. There is a mix of people being interviewed in person, but a lot of this has gone online. And even with smaller regional firms, there's been people even being inducted by Zoom. And I think the legal sector has done really, really well at adapting to all that COVID has thrown at it. And I think even the way that things have been dealt with in court and the way that cases and clients are being handled has been a real big testament. And all the information we're receiving every single day from firms is very much business as usual at the moment. And firms, I think this first lockdown feels very, very different. The second lockdown feels very, very different to the first lockdown, whereby things are still happening. In regards to this particular question, how do you set up informational interviews? I think the first thing that you need to do when considering a move is actually to identify, like this person said, how do you identify people? Well, if you was in litigation, the first thing I would do is look at firms that are large enough to actually support a professional support lawyer. So normally you're only going to find those at large kind of top 200 firms or specialist firms. So I would actually get together a short list, and this applies to any candidate, not just necessarily people who want professional support roles. A lot of the time where you can eliminate the competition, and I always tell NQs this as well, is you want to get together a short list. So identify maybe a list of 10 or 20 firms which are going to be really worth you speaking to and align with what you want to do, and actually go and approach partners directly. I think a lot of the time, by making direct approaches, whether it be on LinkedIn, partners are all too delighted to help. A lot of the time, you'll find that partners are at the top of the food chain, they're not being approached all the time, and they're more than happy to help. So I think by going and asking someone for an informal chat and explaining to them, listen, you're really interested in their department or their firm, and you really think this could be a good potential option for you. Would you mind sharing a bit of time with me? I think you'll be really surprised by how effective that is. And I always advise newly qualified solicitors, don't just wait for active roles to come out, because as soon as that happens, you're joining the mountain of candidates that are also going to be applying for a role. Take your job search into your own hands and actually start reaching out to people directly, because one, you eliminate the competition. Two, a lot of hires are actually made proactively. I think a lot of people always believe that when there's a job on the market or a firm has a requirement, the roles are always live, they're always advertised. It's actually a big misconception. Over half of our partner placements that we made are for roles that were never even advertised. What we do as an agency, to kind of let you know how it works behind the scenes, is we go around speaking to firms every single day, not just about their active roles, but about where they want to grow. What are your pain points? What departments are busy? Okay, you've hired a partner in this department. We've seen this on legal moves. Are you looking to grow that department over what timescale? So actually, a lot of the time that we're submitting candidates are for what I would call a passive vacancy, not an active vacancy. It's a firm that has a need, or a department that has a need to grow, but isn't necessarily out there shouting from the rooftops with a job spec. So it's a really good approach, and I think you can double, if not more than double, your chances as an NQ by actually going out and being proactive. Is an informational interview going to be welcome during COVID-19? Absolutely. I think is yes to that answer. I think a lot of people are working from home, and if anything, I think people would welcome the opportunity to have a conversation, especially when a lot of people might be, feeling loneliness or not having the same level of human contact than they would have at the moment. It's almost like you have to reach out to someone with an actual point to have a conversation. And I think we found as well with a lot of candidates, but they're more receptive than ever to have conversations. And I think that's why there's been so much move at the partner level over the last 3 months for us as an agency. I'm going to come to some of these questions now. I will come back to some of these pre-prepared questions. Let me just have a quick look here. Claudette has submitted, the rates are dropping for remote work. With the law firms pay wages, they pay better wages again. I'm assuming what you mean is salaries and money for temporary, sort of locum roles. I think there's been less of a demand for locums recently that we've seen, but by no means I would say that salaries are dropping or rates are dropping. I think there's always an element of supply and demand, and when a practice area isn't as buoyant, then obviously the rates are not going to be the same as they once were. I remember at the end of the recession when loads of property lawyers were let go, and all of a sudden the property market suddenly went really busy, and because loads of property lawyers had qualified into other areas, all of a sudden people were getting top money. So there is an element of supply and demand, but at the moment I don't think that COVID's necessarily affecting salaries. But some of the busy practice areas that we are really seeing at the moment, family law is really busy due to the effects of COVID and the amount of divorce instructions. That's really busy. Also transactional work is picked back up to where it was pre-COVID. It's really busy. Employment law is also another area that's doing really well. There's another question here. Hi Jason, I've been on a career break. What is the best way to brush up on my skills? I think there's a lot of courses online that you can look up, and what we often find that when someone's returning from a big long gap in law, doing some kind of brush ups on their knowledge of the law, whether it being going through a course that's going to give you technical knowledge, that's a great way to do things. Sometimes just getting out there and doing some pro bono work is also another good way. If you want to brush up on your skills, I would do a course, but equally, if you've had a break from law, I really don't think, and we're totally non-biased, you know, we can put people back into roles. There is always an element though of what practice area is it that you do and what is the demand for that practice area. But what I would say again, but going back and approaching firms directly yourself, which agencies are great, and we're a great agency, but sometimes if you find that there's not enough opportunity out there, sometimes it's better to make those proactive approaches and just network with people. And LinkedIn is a great tool to do that. LinkedIn is extremely powerful, and I would suggest to any lawyer out there to get on LinkedIn and use it and post on it, because it is a work generator. It's something that needs to be done often, and you need to be on there and make sure your profile actually sells you, because the amount of times I've come across lawyers' profiles where there isn't even their practice area mentioned in LinkedIn, you make yourself not easy to find for recruiters. If you are looking for a job, you know, you can always put your CV on a job board. The problem with that sometimes is if you might get bombarded by recruiters, but just having a great LinkedIn profile that really sells you, that really talks about your skills, your attributes, maybe the work that you do, and that is worth gold. And if you, one of the great things about LinkedIn as well, if you're not too familiar with it, when you post on LinkedIn, every time you get a like on a bit of your content or something that's relevant to your audience, that goes out to all of their audience as well. And the power, once you start getting 20, 30 likes on a bit of content, I've seen lawyers who've made a massive impact on the platform. Anyway, not to deviate too much, I'll move on to some of these other questions as they're coming in thick and fast. Christopher has said, why are recruiters reluctant to provide feedback when your application has not been successful? Great question. Generally, we provide feedback to absolutely everybody. I think the only times where that's not always possible is sometimes if we don't do a huge amount of work with paralegal roles. We mainly place at partner level, but we do place at all levels, and because we place at partner level, we get a lot of filter down with roles. So partners wanting to grow their teams. Sometimes the difficulty is when you put out a role at a junior level, you might receive 200 applications, and it's really difficult to get back to everyone. But generally, if someone calls us up, we will always give feedback. If you're not getting feedback and you're I would always approach the recruiter and call them up. Don't wait. Take your job search into your hands. Don't wait on someone else's time frame to hear back. Actually go and say, can you give me some feedback? Can you give me some time? If the recruiter's not giving you feedback, I would not use them, because that is a great service in itself. And do you want someone representing you who's not giving you that level of engagement? Generally, we will go back to everybody, especially when it comes to CVs submitted. We will always give feedback. But a good agency, if they're sending a CV, they should be converting a lot of those CVs into interviews. Our CV sent to interview ratio is in the 80%. If it's less than that, then I would question the quality and the competence of the person doing that. Maxine has said, I've tried to retrain, but despite being an experienced solicitor from a niche area, I keep being told I don't have the necessary skills. It'd be interesting to know what area you are in, Maxine, and what area you're trying to re-qualify into. There's also been a pre-submitted question about changing practice areas. It is really difficult to change practice areas. One of the questions here was, do I need to be a paralegal again to change into a different area? I think, first of all, it really depends on what area it is that you're working in at the moment and what area it is you want to retrain into. If you wanted to go from one area of litigation, say, into another, then there's going to be crossover skills and attributes and experience that you can take with you. But if you wanted to go from something that's very different, say private client to family, that can be more challenging. The advice I would give when changing practice area, though, is the easiest way to change practice areas is to do it in the firm that you're already working with. It's much easier to move internally and make that move internally, because the firm that you're currently with will be more allowing. Now, that isn't always possible, and I totally appreciate that. If that's not possible, another route to try to change practice areas could be to go into the firm that you're currently, to go into a new firm on your current practice area, and then try to find a firm that's going to be open-minded, and maybe be honest with the firm during the interview process that this is your long-term aim, and see if you move to a firm that is more open-minded, are they going to be willing for you to change practice areas? It's not easy, but I do see candidates do it all the time. The candidates that manage to do it successfully are ones that have really got a lot of willpower and determination to change. Again, networking is a big thing. If a partner gets to know you and knows that you've got that passion for that practice area, and this is somewhere you really want to be, you're going to be much more likely to get in with that firm. I think one of the biggest difficulties is, and I think candidates sometimes feel that they're banging their heads against the brick wall a bit, is if you're going to apply for roles that are in a totally different practice area, the problem with that is you're not going to have the experience, and especially if it's a recruiter advertising that role, the difficulty you're going to come up against is, supposing we're advertising for a family lawyer and you're in private client, the difficulty with that is a law firm has to pay a recruiter several £1,000s to hire. So the law firm is going to be very picky and very particular in terms of what they want, because they're paying a high amount of money for that person to come in. Sometimes making direct approaches, and I know I work for a recruitment agency, I know I own a recruitment agency, but I want to give honest advice here. Sometimes the best approach is to try and approach the firm directly with a role, so you bypass out the agency fee, because a firm might be much more willing to give you that training and that investment if you've made that approach directly, rather than it costing them several £1,000s. I think the other thing that you need to do is, and I remember I was speaking to this gentleman the other day who'd been in contact with us for a while but wanted to move into sports law. And sports law is not an easy area to move into, because there's a lot of demand there's a lot of competition as well in that area of law, with it being a little bit more interesting. But what he did was he attended lots of events. He really started to network, and he kept banging on the door of law firms, and he made sure that the experience he did have in commercial was as strong as possible. But I think if you keep banging on that door of someone, and you're coming across with the right approach, the right ethos, the right level of enthusiasm. It is hard for a partner to ignore someone with determination, and I think a lot of the time people might give up on that first try, that person maybe isn't necessarily coming back to them. But I would encourage someone, if you want to move practice areas, take matters into your own hands, bang on that door, start talking to partners, start putting yourself out there, and it's the balance of probability over time. If you bang on enough doors, one of them will fly open. You've just got to keep going when it comes to changing practice areas. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that does address that a bit. But keep going, don't give up. If you want to move practice areas, get out there, network, and introduce yourself to partners and show them the passion that you have. And I think that will go a long way. Let me look at some of these other questions. Melrose says, I've been on a career break after an illness. I want to move discipline as a solicitor, but don't have experience in the new fields. Okay, quite similar to the last question. I think that if you've been off with illness as well and you want to move practice area, it might be better to maybe go back into the practice area that you currently worked in. It depends how long the illness was. If it's a big period of time, it might be a lot to not only be moving back to a role after maybe a long period off. I don't know how long you've had off, but it might be better just to get back in a role to brush up your skills and then maybe look to make the move. It might be a lot to go back into a new role and try to change disciplines at the same time. Aisha says, hi Jason, I am looking to work in other fields for better job satisfaction and to expand into other areas, but I seem to be stuck in personal injury and just can't get out of it. Most jobs are via agencies who are not helpful at all, and this just wastes time. Would you have advice for this? It is difficult. I think that when you are in a practice area, you can get stuck in that practice area, and I think especially there's a lot of people who have been in PI from paralegal level, and maybe they've done their training contracts and they're stuck in that area of law. I think one of the first bits of advice I would give is to first think about what area of law is it that you do want to move into, what does interest you, and once you've kind of started to go on that journey, like I said earlier, maybe think about the 5 to 10 year career plan. And that's something I tell candidates to do every 3 or 6 months. Sit down and do a kind of career MOT. What am I happy with? What am I unhappy about? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? And I think sometimes when you're in a role, you're so busy, you've got a busy workload, you've got a busy caseload, and sometimes you just need to step back to actually give yourself that time to really think about your career and where you want to go, and even how you want to market yourself. One thing I will talk about, which I think is really relevant to people, especially if you're in a fee earning role now, is about full potential. What do I mean by full potential? What I mean by that is, I'll give you an example, and this is, I think, really relevant to anyone that's in a fee earning role, and it's always great advice that people say is well received. If you, for instance, there's 2 conveyancers, let's say. Conveyancer number 1 has a secretary, they have a post completions department, they have lots of support to bill 150k, and they're working at, let's say, 50% capacity. The second conveyancer does all their own admin. They don't have a post completions department. They bring in most of their own work. See how that 150 figure can look very different. Candidate number B, I would argue, it is the stronger candidate because of the fact that the billings figures are made up, 1, of their own clients, 2, they haven't got admin. So if what I mean by full potential is if that candidate was to then move roles, if you know, an admin person would enable them to take their billings, I don't know, up to 250k, what I would say is that person shouldn't be selling themselves on the 150,000, they should be selling themselves on what their full potential is in their next role. So another example is if you're billing 150,000 and you're only working 50% capacity because perhaps there isn't enough workflow coming into the department, in your next role, technically, your total potential at 100 capacity should be 300,000. But candidates all the time always sell themselves on the current, and the current Normally, sometimes it isn't that great, because otherwise, if everything was rosy and everything was perfect, they're not going to be looking for a job in the first place. So I always think that what you should do is step back and actually think about, what is my full potential, because that's what you want to sell yourself on. And again, Aisha, I know I've slightly derailed off your question there, but again, I think what's really relevant is when you're going into interview for a firm, if you start talking about what your full potential is, and you show a level of real commercial awareness, and you show that you're someone that knows facts, figures and pounds, pence and shillings, this does come down to, a lot of the time, especially for fee earners, money. It's about being commercially savvy. And another bit of business advice I would give while we're on the subject is, at a junior, and I've done a podcast on this actually last night, and we were talking, myself and a gentleman called Michael Byrne from Carbon Law Partners, who has an ABS. He was saying that the pyramid structure in legal it's very old, and the whole partnership model is quite broken. And I do agree with that. You sort of go and slog it out for years and years and years on this rat race to climb up the ladder. And then when you get to the top of the ladder, and I'm not trying to be negative, because there's loads of great opportunities out there, there really, really are. But when you get to the top of that ladder, then you've got to buy into the equity. Then you've got to raise sometimes a six-figure sum, and then it's not proper equity anyway. It's equity that's based on points, and it doesn't pay out in the right way. So you could be 15 years in on that rat race to get to being a partner, and actually when you do get there, it's not always as glorious as it can be. But there's lots of firms out there now that have different structures, and so you can basically earn as you go. You can well, it's old-fashioned, eat what you kill, but you can work on a fee split basis. And what I always say to candidates is, try and develop a client base as soon as you can, because as soon as you have clients and you have revenue at your disposal, you're going to have a world of opportunities open to you, and even things like flexible working for yourself. If you can build up a client base, you're going to be on a better deal, because there's firms out there which pay up to 80% of billings, and you won't have to work as many hours. You get better flexibility. You can also fast track to partnership. But to bring it back to your question, I know I've derailed there. I think if you're stuck in personal injury, think about what it is that you want to do and how it is that you can possibly get there. I would start going out and networking. I think it's all in showing people, okay, maybe if you want to cross out, maybe it'd be good to stick in litigation, more general litigation, because obviously you've got a skill set there in litigating of sorts. But what I would say is, a lot of agencies aren't great, and it sounds like you've not had the best experience there. But I think the difficulty is if you are applying for a different practice area, again, it goes back to what I said about agencies being on a brief. They should come back to you every single time. I don't agree that they shouldn't. But the difficulty is there's a lot of people in PI wanting to move. So I think take it into your own hands, start to network, start to reach out to partners, start to target it down and write some really good personal emails out to people. And with persistence, I think your time will also be much better harnessed in actually making direct approaches to partners, rather than sitting on job boards and it sounding like it's a bit soul destroying, reaching out to people and then not getting a reply back. So I would stop applying for active roles, and I would start marketing and going out and networking and finding your route into a new practice area that way. I'll move on. So Josephine has said, as an NQ, I have experience in corporate and family law. I'm struggling to find a corporate role, but can see there are more family roles available. If I took a family role now, but ultimately want to practice corporate, how is switching seen? I feel there would be a stigma to doing something just to keep me practicing. Is it better to have any legal role, or is it better to wait and work in professions and chase the preferred role? It's a really good question. I think that I would ultimately try and get into corporate now. I think the difficulty, if you take a role in family law now, is you're going to find yourself busy in a new role, practicing law in family. And what's going to happen then is your job search is going to take a back seat, because you're going to be so busy in your new role. And the longer that clock ticks on in family law, the more difficult it's going to be to move to corporate. I would, like I said earlier on, I would start going, if you know that corporate's where you want to be and that's what your passion is. Let's start putting together a list of firms which you think are a good option near you. Don't wait for active roles, because it sounds like that you're kind of waiting there for active roles to come up. The difficulty when they do come up is you're going to have a lot of competition. So what I would do is I would start now reaching out and marketing yourself in that area. Get together a list of every, and a good way to sometimes do this is, if you're at a Legal 500 firm now, print out the Legal 500 tiers for every single firm in that practice area in your region. It will also say on the Legal 500 who the heads of departments are, and it will give you every bit of advice you need. Then what you could do is build out, maybe in Excel, a target list of who to start targeting, and start taking your job search into your own hands. So then what you can do is almost start selling yourself into firms, which is what we do as recruiters. That is what we do. We take people out to market. But the difficulty you're going to have, Josephine, is corporate is a busy practice area. So let's get ahead of the competition. The first thing we need to do is start to create a target list. Once we've got that target list, start going out and speaking to people, and actually keep a really detailed log of what they've said. So you might speak to John over at Smith & Co. He's given you this advice. This is what he's said. Then you can follow back to him and start to sell yourself in. And then you'll be able to focus all your energy. And it could even be, sometimes if you want to bring up a full list of every single law firm, just go to the Law Society, find a solicitor, and then you can start going through every single firm that's close to you on your doorstep. But my advice is, I would try and get a corporate role and just take the job search into your own hands rather than qualifying into family. I think that could, I think the thing is, I just think, when is the, how long are you going to stay in family until that happens? And the problem you're going to have is, as every month goes by, you're going to find there'll be newly qualified people who have just come up. It sounds like there's a lot of people here that really need to really need some advice as well in regards to just selling themselves generally. What I would always say is, just remember, the CV is a document to sell you. And it's a misconception that what lawyers tend to do, and people in the legal profession, and I've noticed this over many, many, many years, is the CV, because of the nature of legal, because of the legislation, the law, it being very factual, a CV tends to take the format of a roles and responsibilities document. And when you look at them, it's got there, it almost looks like a job spec. It's just got a list of the roles and responsibilities. And actually, when you look at a CV, the whole purpose of a CV, yes, it's got to have a nature of the roles and responsibilities, but its ultimate purpose is to sell you. So you need to make sure that the CV is strong, because there was some stats ran a couple of years ago, I can't remember exactly who by, but hiring managers only spend an average of 30 seconds looking at a CV, so it needs to grab. I would always say, do a personal profile in your CV. What I would steer clear of, and this is advice I give to candidates, is when you're doing your personal profile at the top, this only needs to be a paragraph. You don't want to make it too long. It doesn't, a covering letter is something separate, and we can talk about that in a moment. But what I would say when it comes to the personal profile is, avoid words like, I'm ambitious, I'm driven, I'm very entrepreneurial. The problem with all of those kind of buzzwords is they're very, very overused. And if I had £1 for every time a CV said I'm driven, ambitious, and whatever, the problem is it's overused now. So you need, what I would always say to candidates is, what you want the reader to come to the conclusion of from looking at a CV is that they're going to come to the conclusion that you're ambitious without you saying why you're ambitious. You need to give them a story, tell them a bit about you. What gives you this ambition? What is the actual driving force behind the ambition? If you're going to say you're ambitious, then what I would recommend is actually listing down why you think you're ambitious, and I would put that down. But just putting the words ambitious, driven, entrepreneurial by itself, I don't think is necessarily enough, because it's overused. So I'll move on to some of these other questions. Just on the covering letter before I go, sorry, on the personal profiles, I do think that's important. I would always as well make sure that you come to life, that you are a person. And if you've got an interesting backstory, so I'll give you an example, and this is a bit of an extreme example, but I still think it's a good example nonetheless. I spoke to a candidate a couple of weeks ago. She was a conveyancer up in, I think it was somewhere in the Midlands, and she told me that none of this was on her CV. She went to a very she grew up in a council estate and went to a very rundown comprehensive school, and she told me this story about how both of her parents had passed away during her training contract, and how she still managed to qualify. And when I was speaking to her, the kind of how she rode through all those challenges and adversities to still qualify into law, I just thought was an incredible backstory. Now, that might not necessarily belong on the personal profile at the top, but bringing yourself to life in your experience and your background, and actually saying, this is me. You know, there's only one place to really bring yourself to life on a CV, and that's at the top in the personal profile, because what actually separates two candidates, you know, if you've got two corporate lawyers who are both in very similar firms, what actually separates them at the end of the day? And normally it's personality. It's that, you know, if you've both got the same experience and you're very similar in backgrounds, it's the personality that's sort of stands you apart. So if you've got a story, that's the place to bring it to life. Let people know why you're passionate. Let them know why you want a role. Let them know what you can offer them. And another bit of advice I would give you, and this is what I've been told in a couple of other podcasts that I did recently, is when you're going out there to interview at a firm, look at the firm that you're interviewing at and think, how can I add value? Pick up on things in their news sections, pick up on things about, you know, what makes that firm great. If you're seen as being someone that can add value and being someone that, you know, can look at things overall on a business level, that's going to come across so well in interview if you're seen as a problem solver. So I'm going to move on to some of these other questions because I'm very conscious of the time and I want to get through as many of these as I possibly can for all of you. So the next question is, let me just see some of these. I think we've covered already. Okay, this is an interesting one. Portia, I went in-house upon qualification, but after 3 years, I want to return to private practice. Dealing with recruiters has been very discouraging as they seem unwilling to entertain the prospect. Do you have any tips on whether such a move is realistic, or do I need to accept that returning will be impossible? Not at all. I think I've got mixed views on in-house and going in-house, and I think my views on it are, if you're going in-house at a junior level of PQE, that can have advantages, a lot of advantages. You're going to be involved in a business, you're going to be dealing at a senior level, but also you've got to bear in mind, if you go in-house at a junior level, you're going to be seen as management. So a lot of the time, it can be a big challenge going in-house at a junior level, because you're going to be dealing with stakeholders, you're going to be at the top of a business. So a lot of the time people are coming to you, looking to you for the answers to questions. And if you're junior in PQE, normally in a private practice model, you would always have a chain of command upwards to go and ask these questions too. I think a lot of people normally go in-house kind of later in their careers, but it has become more and more popular for people more junior to go in-house. I think if you go in-house at a later level of PQE, so maybe 8 years plus, I think it can be difficult to make the move back. I think there's pros and there's cons to in-house, and I could talk probably about this for a whole hour in itself. I think that it depends what practice area you're in, Portia, but I don't think that there should be any difficulty with you going back to private practice. There's obviously some areas that slot really well back into private practice, but I think if anything, it's given you more experience. I think, again, it comes back down to, I think the recruitment industry as a whole, and I've said this many times, is not a great industry. There's a lot of people out there operating, not necessarily training people properly, giving the level of service that they should be. And you know, if you're not feeling that you're getting the right level of service from a recruiter, move on, because you know, you don't want your confidence knocked. But at 3 years PQE, I'd be interested to know the practice area that you do, because I think that could be you know, quite relevant to the conversation. But I don't think there should be any difficulty moving back at 3 years. I think if you was at a later level of PQE, it might be difficult. One of the things that sometimes is difficult about moving back from in-house to private practice is in-house does traditionally pay more. So when candidates come back to private practice, they normally want a match of what they're on salary-wise. And it's not possible. What does also happen when you go in-house is, what do we stack up your salary against? To put you on a salary scale, normally what we look at is billings, and I look at the old-fashioned rule of thumb, which is 3 times salary billings. If you don't have any billings history and you've been in-house, it can be quite difficult in some firms to know how that person's going to plug back in on a salary scale. But to answer the question, it shouldn't be an issue. And I would even say get in touch with us at JMC and let us see what we can do to help you and give you actual advice in regards to that. I think just on a closing note with in-house, while we're talking about this, I think that what you want to do is just, if you do want to go in-house, you need to think about, you're going to lose a lot of your specialism when you go in-house, because your skill set broadens out. A lot of the time you're advising on strategy, you're advising on the direction of a business, and it can be great to be at the grassroots level of a business. But what might happen is, if you're a corporate lawyer dealing with M&A and you're dealing with deals and transactions all the time, going in-house as a general corporate lawyer, as an in-house legal counsel, you can lose that specialism, and it can be tricky to make the move back to in-house. But there's some areas like planning. If you've been a planning lawyer in a local authority and you want to go back to private practice, that's great. You know a lot of the people in the local authority, and that can be really beneficial. So moving on, let's just find another question here. So AC says, hi Jason, would taking a year out at this time to fit in with the current job market being slow have a negative effect on prospects when things pick up? I think it's going to partly depend on, the practice area that you're in. I think taking a career break in general is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't always have to have a negative effect, but I think it would depend on things like the amount of experience you've got before you're taking that year out. What practice area is that you're in? Is it a busy practice area? Because you've got to bear, I don't think it's an ultimate issue, but you've got to bear in mind that when you take time out from a role, if an active role comes up and there's a candidate, you get 2 candidate CVs as a hiring manager, and you've got 1 candidate that's taken a year out, and then you've got another candidate that's currently in the job. It's obvious that the hiring manager is going to gravitate towards the candidate that's got current experience. However, again, it comes down to how you market yourself. If I had 2 candidates in front of me, one of them had taken a year out, but that person came across with passion, fire in their belly, real desire, and I thought they were the right person for the job, would I take such a short-term view that it might take them to get a couple of weeks or a few weeks to get up and running? Would I really discount that person? I wouldn't. You're always going to find some firms out there that are a little bit draconian in their views. I'm very modern in my approach and views and things, and I don't think it should take a massive impact. I think you just need to be aware of when you're leaving your current role, let's say, targets, billings, things like that. Are you leaving your current role in a good shape? So when you do come back to being marketed, what's the situation then? I'll move on to another question. I hope that helps. Elizabeth says, hi Jason, how do you sell yourself if you want a part-time role? I'm a single parent and I'm looking to work 3 to 4 days a week. I'm assuming there's more flexible working going on now. Absolutely. There is lots of opportunity for part-time. And I think being a single parent, there's also a lot of firms now which will look at, I think flexible working has, there's been a spotlight shone on it since COVID has started. And I do know of firms that let people pick their own hours, let them have unlimited annual leave. And I think the whole working, me personally, I don't think the world is ever going to go back to the place it was in before COVID. I think this is going to be a permanent change, that there is going to be a lot more flexibility with employers. I think a lot of companies are going to scale down the size of their offices. I think hot desking is going to be more embraced. I think if you are looking for a role 3 to 4 days a week, the first place to go to is a job board. But again, I would always sell yourself into firms, because a lot of firms do just sometimes want someone on 4 days a week, maybe because there's not quite enough work or enough of a caseload to justify someone full time. But we place people all the time into part-time roles, and I think someone who works 3 or 4 days a week normally does sometimes do the work of someone who works 5 days in 4 days. So you know, and especially if you're juggling that with being a single parent, you know, I think lots of firms will entertain that. I think you just need to find the right firm, Elizabeth, who's going to be a good match for you. But again, you know, don't always wait for jobs to come up. Be proactive. That's one of the key messages for today. Get out there and market yourselves, and don't be afraid to talk to partners, because most people, 95% of people, are absolutely more than happy to help and give you advice. And partners will often remember when they were junior themselves, so people will help you. So go out there and sell yourself, and have conversations with people. And you know, I think you'll be really surprised by the results that can reap. Nick says, any feelings for the scope of in-house roles at the moment? Looking to move back in after 3 years career change in a direction away from law into aviation. Had 12 years in-house before I left. In-house is really, really busy, and I'd done a talk on this the other day, where I was explaining that in-house and that end of the market is only going to grow more and more, because more companies are wanting to slash some of their spends with law firms, and they're wanting to try and move more legal services in-house. So, and also a lot of companies now are waking up to the fact that lawyers are not just someone who's there to look through contracts, that actually business advisors and people who can add real value, whether it's at the forefront of a deal or whether it's a business looking to expand. To have a good in-house counsel is worth its weight in salt. We get a lot of people, a lot of companies who are new to the UK, who are looking to set up shop, or innovative startups, and even quite reasonably small businesses looking to take on in-house counsel. I think the in-house market is very, very busy. What I would say that when it comes to in-house roles, there is a lot of people applying for them. A lot of lawyers want to move in-house. If we put up an in-house advert, the phone does not stop ringing all day. It's very popular. But again, we can talk about CVs in a bit more detail in just a moment. I think which follows nicely on. Josephine says, do you recommend paying CV writers? Getting mixed feedback on my CV. Some recruiters like it and some others don't. I personally would never pay a CV writer. I don't necessarily understand the value that they would add. No one knows your experience better than you. I would say to anyone here that does want help with their CVs, by all means send them in, and I will try my best to get round and give it practical advice to you. And you can email me at Jason, I'll say it at the end, but if you do have a pen and paper, it's jason@jmc-legal.com, and I'll give you honest feedback on CVs. I would never pay a CV writer. I think you know your own experience, you know your background, and I think a CV writer is probably going to take your money and not add huge amounts of value. I've never had great feedback from candidates who have used them, but a good recruitment consultant should give you honest advice. And if you're getting contradicting feedback from recruiters, I think what you need to do is you always use your gut feeling. You know if the person generally who's talking to you is competent. And I would always say, if you're not having a great experience with recruiters, test the recruiter that you're working with. Ask them some questions about their background and their level of knowledge. For instance, I told a candidate the other day that she wasn't having a great experience with a particular recruiter, and she was a property lawyer, and I said to her to ask that recruiter what they know about leasehold enfranchisement. Do your due diligence on someone, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because if that person's handling your details and that person is out there marketing you, what you need to be careful of is, and I say this to candidates often, is the person that's marketing you, is the firm is the end user, the firm, interested in you, or are they not interested in you because the approach that the recruiter has made isn't right? And sometimes it might not be the fact that you're not right for the firm, but you might not have been introduced in the right way. You might have not had your full potential really shone out to that partner. Recruitment is a skill. Doing recruitment effectively is a really broad skill set that you need, and there's a lot of people that aren't doing it right. So always make sure you do your due diligence, because one of the worst things can be applying for a role, and then having that firm deaded off as a option for 6 months, because normally when a recruiter sends over a CV, they own your introduction and you as a candidate for a period of 6 months. So even if I came along later and sold you properly to the firm, yes, I might still be able to open the door, but you wouldn't be able to work with me. You'd have to go back the majority of the time and work with the original agency. Now, there is technicalities to that you could say to the firm that you don't want to work with that agent and you want to self-nominate a different one, but you don't really want to get into that territory. It's not really a great place to be. So I'll move on to some of these other questions. I'm going to get through as many as I can. It's been great reading all of these. Christopher says, do recruiters focus on present experience when deciding to put a candidate forward rather than past experience? I think present experience is always your current experience, but you know, there is times when candidates have not had the best experience in a role. They might not have had the best partner that they're working with, and obviously a lot of someone's destiny can be controlled by the person heading up a department. You might not have had the best feelings. You might have been missold a role. The goalposts might have moved. There could be a multitude of factors. Yes, present experience is relevant, but again, making sure that you work with a recruiter that's right and understands how to market you is important. Because if I had a candidate that, and it happens all the time, you know, there's people out there that haven't had the best experience in a role and they decide to pull the plug and get out early rather than sit there for 2 years, which I think is even worse, sitting in a role that isn't right, because then you've got 2 years sat in a role where you haven't got the best maybe it's achievements to talk about, and then the first question the partner is asked, well, if it was wrong, why have you been there so long? So I would always get out earlier rather than later, but I would always focus on a candidate's past role and talk about what they've achieved as an overall period of time rather than just focusing on the current. Again, when it comes to using a good recruiter, it's all about someone who understands how to market you properly and how to bring out that full potential. And full potential is something that I talk a lot about, and it's about understanding that you might be in a situation now, but how to sell you to your best ability. What is the maximum that you can achieve in your next role, speaking optimistically? Yes, we can speak in a language which is more, you know, what is the realistic, what is the maximum, what is the lowest, but we don't want to go in, and what lawyers do a lot of the time is they go in and they sell themselves, or I'll be very cautious in what I'm going to sell, and actually they can undersell themselves a lot of the time, and that's not good either. You need to find the middle ground. Yes, you might not want to oversell and set expectations so high that you can't deliver, but don't go the other way. You need to find that middle where you're comfortable with, and by stepping back and thinking, what is it I build, what is it that I can achieve, what is it I can do in the next role, what happens if I have more support? Hopefully you can find out you know, where your full potential lies, and I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit alien being on a one-way audio, so I'm assuming it makes sense to people. Next, any advice on how to move from a senior employment lawyer into employee relations HR management role in industry, not for a law firm? That's from Faria. I would say that to move in-house into more of a PR HR management role, maybe you need to get a lot of experience at dealing with kind of corporate support in employment law, and it maybe look at the non-contentious work that you're doing as kind of an experience point, and then maybe trying to make the move from there. But again, I think if you're going to be an employment lawyer and you want to go into employee relations and stuff, start building a LinkedIn profile, start getting known for being not just an employment lawyer, start maybe doing a podcast, start putting out blogs. So when you go to apply for these roles, you've got a showcase of stuff, and it could be that you start creating your personal brand on LinkedIn, and your personal brand is, you know, you start talking about HR management, this, that, and the other. So then you've kind of got a portfolio to show your next employer. So that could be a really good way for you to get in and start to sell yourself in that light. Okay, Nicola says, if you have a broad role with various practice areas in-house, what's the best way to try to move back into a more specialised role, preferably in private practice? I talked about this earlier on. That is one of the difficulties of being in-house is you can lose your specialism. I think the first thing that you'd need to do is think about what practice areas that you need to move into, how much demand is that, do some market research on job boards. Again, I think what you'd need to do is, yes, you might lose your specialism, but what you need to do is focus on the positives of what you can bring to the firm. Yes, you might have lost your specialism, but what you've lost in your specialism, you've made up for in being, at the forefront of management. You've made up for being in the nitty gritty of business. What I've lost in specialism, I've made up for in X, Y, and Z. And I'm now this dynamic. I'm used to dealing at stakeholder level. This is the type of candidate I am. I'm more robust. I feel I can bring in business. I understand business better. Try to focus on what it is that you can offer, not the specialisms that you've lost. And hopefully that's helpful. President says, I'm new to the industry and the stage of gaining the right qualifications to build experience in the future for a long-term career aspiration in corporate and equity law. My professional background is in marketing and I'm looking to change careers completely. I think if you're wanting to get into legal, the first thing that you need to do if you want to get into corporate and equity law is get a paralegal role. I've done lots of other videos and podcasts about how to crack in as a paralegal. It's when you first get into the industry, you've got to sell yourself. If you're not selling yourself from previous experience, you've got to think, what is it that you've got as a person that you can offer that first employer? It says here that your background is in marketing. That's great, but having a background in marketing is quite a contrast to law, and a lot of law firms might really like that. What is it that you could offer a firm that, yes, okay, you might not have a specialism in that area of law now, but what has marketing given you that you feel you could add value to a law firm? What is it that you've learned in that time? Think about your transferable skills, and hopefully that will really help. I'm going to try and whittle for 2 more of these. I'm really sorry to anyone, but I didn't get time to get to your questions today. Sally says, I applied for a role for an agent. When I was rejected, I called and found out the agent only put forward their first choice of candidate. That person dropped out and I was put forward instead. I felt the agent was making the decision instead of offering 2 strong candidates. That is not common. I would say that agent hasn't acted fairly. I would be inclined, well, it depends how you want to handle this. You can go to the firm directly and make a complaint. The agent should not be playing God and deciding who goes forward for the role. Yes, the agent can choose who is submitted to the role, but if you went through the process of talking to the agent and they said they were going to send you and then you found out they didn't, I would argue that that's not ethically correct. So I would be maybe looking to take that further if you do want to talk to the firm about that. And lastly, Chriso says, what advice for those who work in smaller practices, don't have resources, tech behind them, or people who've been working part-time? So what advice would you give to those who work in smaller practices that don't have resources and tech behind them, or who've been working part-time due to care commitments and maybe older? I think that working in a small practice has its advantages as well as its disadvantages. Yes, you might not have the same level of technology and case management that you've got in a larger practice, but a lot of the time you might be getting more hands-on. You might be having much more in the way of client contact. You might be doing much more in the way of client care, business development, building relationships, referrals. So I think that I would try to focus on what it is that you have got while working at a smaller practices, because there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I would say that working in a large firm as a trainee solicitor, you might not get the same experience at a large city firm, but you might get at a smaller, more entrepreneurial West End firm. So there can be pros and cons to both. But, I would try to focus on what it is that you are getting. And I'm sure there's lots of things you're getting, but maybe you wouldn't be getting at a larger firm, but you could use to really sell yourself in, or maybe managing more stages of the process. Not having the same level of support could really be helpful to you there. I think I've got time for 1 more. I'm conscious of not running over. I am going to take this last question from Alex. Thank you for this. Hi, Jason. I have a question. My last employer had to close down due to the cardinal sin committed by the principal of the firm. I've improved my CV and even invested in the good standing certificate, but still have no luck in finding a job. My position was regulatory and compliance, 2 years PQE. Could you please advise what else I could do to separate myself from the demise of my former employer and find a job? Do I need to restart my career? what an awful situation, Alex. I really sympathise with that. It's not a good position to be in. But if you're not in no way involved in what's happened at the firm, and you know, I don't think it should affect you. Yes, okay, it's not great if your current firm has been closed down or has sanctions by the SRA, but don't let that. I don't think it should in any way stop you from still finding a job. You shouldn't need to restart your career, and I think a lot of people will be really sympathetic as to the background there. What I would just do is make sure that you explain it properly. And this is sometimes where it can be difficult when you're just submitting a CV. I would be inclined to maybe, because once you're 2-3 roles in or two roles time, that's not going to matter, Alex, because that won't be your current role. But I would almost be inclined that when you do submit a CV, pick up the phone and follow it on with a phone call and explain the situation properly. Let the person see how passionate you are and how much that you want to, you know, what you can offer that role. It's probably better to explain this on the phone than just submitting a CV, but it shouldn't be a barrier. And anyone that says that, you know, that should stop you moving forward, I think is incorrect. That's all the time I've got for questions today. It's been such a delight. I want to thank the Law Society for this opportunity to talk to you all. There is another Q&A. If you have a look on the Law Society events page on next Tuesday the 24th, again at the same time of 2 p.m. You can sign up for that, and if you didn't get a chance to submit your question today, what I would suggest that you do is email in the events team at the Law Society, and then they can push your questions to the top for next time. Thank you very much to you all. It's been an absolute delight, and I hope to see many of you again next week if you are available.